Hello, my name is Dan Skip Allen, and I am your host for this new series of videos this evening. And now the hosts will vary between myself, Dan Skip Allen, Andrew Cabral, and Stephen Billings. And we will have a rotating group of co-hosts. And for this episode, my co-host is Mr. Mark Tordai. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm good. How about you, Dan?
I'm doing great. This is the first episode in this new series that I'm doing, and it's a tribute to Mr. Robert Osborne from Turner Classic Movies. He came up with this book called The 52 Must-See Movies and Why They Matter. And he had a panel of guests, and they came up with these 52 movies. So my panel, along with Mark and a few others, are going to go down the 52 movies one at a time. And for the very first episode, I chose to do Casablanca because it's my favorite film of all time. And I wanted to start off with a big movie. So we're not going to do these in order. You don't know which episodes are going to come next. But the first one I wanted to go with a big one, so I decided to go with Casablanca. And with that being said, I'm going to get into a little bit of the casting of Casablanca. We have Humphrey Bogart as Rick Blaine. Now he owns Cafe American. And then we also have Ingrid Bergman as Ilsa Lund. And then we have Paul Henreid as Victor Laszlo. And we have, oh God, I have to look at my notes. I knew I had to look at my notes. Claude Rains is really good as Captain Renault, otherwise known as Louis in the film. We also have Sidney Greenstreet as Ferrari. He owns another bar called the Blue Parrot. Peter Lorre is a kind of a questionable kind of guy called Ugati. And then we also have Dooley Wilson is Sam. And this movie was directed by Michael Curtiz. Now, it starts off with narration by Lon Marseille. Lon Marseille is the narrator. This is how the movie gets started. So, with the narration, there's also a map, which is a really neat map. They're showing how refugees get from France over to Casablanca, and they go through all these different countries in Egypt and all these different places to get to Casablanca. So, Mark, I want to get right into this. What are your thoughts about the cast, the director, some of these actors, and the portrayal of their characters?
I think one of the most interesting things about this film is it's basically full of American immigrants. There's only two natural-born Americans, I think, in the whole cast, if I'm not mistaken. I think only two. One, of course, was Humphrey Bogart, and the other was Dooley Wilson. Other than that, you have an entire host of wonderful mostly European actors from all over Europe. First of all, the director, Michael Curtiz, was Hungarian, as was the gentleman who played Carl, the waiter. But you have people from, like Peter Lorre was Hungarian, but he was his village today would be in Slovakia. Claude Rains, of course, was English. The gentleman who played Heinrich Strasser, who was the German major, German, obviously. There's Austrians. There's also a lot of Jewish Americans and European Jews in this film, which I think is interesting, much like Michael Curtiz. And so to me, that's really the most interesting part of this. There's Russians, there's French, there's Swedish. Actually, there's one more American actor. I'm just also reading the Wikipedia page. A guy named Dan Seymour, who played Abdul the doorman. So basically three American actors, everyone else was from Europe. And I just find that the whole that whole part of it is so interesting. That this is really one of the most iconic American movies ever made, but the entire cast, most of the crew, and the director were almost all born, I would say like over 95% born in Europe. So I don't know. I think that's a real interesting kind of tidbit. As far as casting is concerned, I mean, this is really a perfect cast. I mean, there's absolutely no one who's not fit for their role, and pardon me, who doesn't do an amazing job. Particularly, my actual favorite actor is the gentleman who plays Carl the waiter. His name was S.Z. Zakel. He was a Hungarian Jew, and I thought he was really great. He also appeared in lots of other movies in the classic area. He was a very heavy-set man. But yeah, anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to say about that. Again, I think what's very fascinating is just how American this movie is, and yet how almost everyone was associated with it was not born in America. They were all immigrants.
Yeah, there are really a lot of different actors and actresses from all over the world in this film. But you know, there's one actor, the lead actor, Rick. I mean, he is essential American, an American actor, and he's from New York City. That's the biggest city in this country, the main hub of the country. Of course, we don't really get into a whole lot of him where he comes from, and of course, Ingrid Bergman and Victor Laszlo are from Poland, and so they run into Rick in France. Well, Ingrid Bergman's Ilsa runs into Rick in France, and of course, we know about the flashback scenes. We have flashback scenes. Yeah. And I'll get into the flashback scenes a little bit later. And I just want to. This is a spoilers, so. I know this movie came out in 1943, folks. So I'm sorry if you have not seen Casablanca. I am sorry. We are going to spoil this movie because this is in a way, it's us like taking it scene by scene, kind of dissecting this great film, and that's what we're going to be doing on the 52 Must-See Movies and Why They Matter series that we're going to be doing. We're going to be dissecting these films. And I'll tell you what, once again, Claude Rains, obviously, if you know about the monster movies, you know him. He was the Invisible Man, and Peter Lorre, another great character actor. I mean, listening to like the documentaries about Casablanca and hearing how this cast came together and the wheeling and dealing that went on in Hollywood back in the day was very, very interesting. But I'll tell you what, I could not imagine a better cast and a better group of people to play these iconic characters. Iconic is a big word, but there's not a whole lot of bigger words to use for Casablanca. And I think this cast, Peter Lorre, I mean, Claude Rains, I mean, Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, I mean, these are just all-time greats if you're a movie fan. And I know, Mark, you're just as big a movie fan as I am.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's like this really is one of the most iconic casts. Humphrey Bogart, obviously he was in The Maltese Falcon. He was in one of my favorite classic films, which was Treasure at the Sierra Madre, the John Huston film, Western, amazing, amazing movies. But this is his opus. So this is his life's work. He died in, I think, 1957. He was born in 1900, so he died very young. But this was it for him. This was his life's work. I mean, he did great stuff before, he did great stuff after, but this was it. So it's really interesting to see him in this film, being, again, one of the very few Americans. He was very bitter and very kind of removed from the war, wanted to be removed from the war, was just a simple bartender who, made it to Morocco, which so happened to be under Vichy French control. And it's really interesting in his character, the way that he goes from that sort of grizzled, kind of bitter guy who then rekindles with this lost love who he, always says will always have Paris. and then by the end of it, he's kind of like doing the right thing and taking a side, which I think is really interesting as well, because he does take a side, and it's really cool, especially the very, very last scene in the movie with him and Claude Rains' character with the bottle of water. That's, to me, that's a really interesting thing of the evolution of Humphrey Bogart's character, and it's also a testament to him as an actor for sort of being able to play that grizzled kind of bitter character and then also change. So this is one of the best, most memorable characters and performances, I think, in Hollywood history as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And with that being said, let's get into the question, and this is the question that Robert Osborne asked, and this is what we're going to ask of every guest of every movie that we talk about. Why is Casablanca an essential must-see movie for you, Mr. Mark Tordai? And I'm going to answer it after you answer it.
Well, I personally think it's the greatest film ever made. Regardless of my opinion, because obviously I have my favorite film. Casablanca might not be my favorite film ever. Of course, sometimes I use the phrase "best film ever made" for my favorite film, but this really is, to me, the sort of triumph of the American classic film era. You have not only a great male lead, but you have a very amazing lead female who's very feisty and very powerful in her role, which is played, of course, by Ingrid Bergman. Why I consider it the greatest film ever made is just for many different reasons. I would have to say it's 1942. It tells a lot about the war. And really, America, I don't even think had been America was not in the war maybe they had just started to get into the war, rather, when the film was released. And obviously, Rick being an American, being in Morocco, I don't believe that during the time that they were involved in the movie Casablanca, I don't think the Americans had gone to war yet. I don't believe so, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, regardless, it really just tells a lot. It tells a lot about the era. It tells a lot about the war. It tells a lot about people during the time, the different sides that people were taking during the war as well. And it sort of reflects that and that old kind of classic Hollywood perfection, where the writing is amazing. The cinematography is really good. It's a tense film. Not a lot of people see it as a romantic movie. I see that secondary to kind of more of a thriller kind of movie, sort of almost an espionage type movie. It sort of lays the groundwork for those types of films later on. The romantic B story, I think, is kind of a part of it, but I don't see it as a romantic movie. Anyway, that as well is part of this magic. It's also one of the most quoted movies of all time. It's also one of the most, as you mentioned, iconic movies of all time. People know this film. People love this film. And I guess the whole idea for me would just to go back on and say, it's one of the best directed films of all time, one of the best written films of all time, one of the best shot films of all time, and it's also stood the test of time. And I think all of those things make a movie not only memorable, but make it one of the greats. To me, there's just no other argument for the idea that Casablanca is just not the greatest film of all time. I think when you just add all those components, you just get an amazing, solid film and probably one of the best ever made.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Now I'm going to answer the question why I think Casablanca is essential to every film fan, and it's a must-see movie. And I agree exactly what you just said. I think it's the greatest movie ever made. It's my favorite movie ever made. But I also think it's the greatest movie ever made. First of all, you have a love story. Second of all, you're dealing with World War II. Third of all, you're dealing with kind of like a foreign country, and you're dealing with shady characters, and It just you have like a noir feel to it. You have a real noir feel to it. The black and white is just. I mean, I don't think this movie would be nearly as good if it wasn't in black and white. That black and white really brings out the greatness of the film, and then the shadows and just the different things that are going on. Obviously, the fact that people like George Lucas have used this very set in Star Wars. The Mos Eisley Cantina was Rick's Cafe Americana. If you look this up, it is the same set on the Warner Brothers back lot that they used for Rick's Cafe Americana. And if you look outside, it kind of looks like it in a lot of ways. But the acting, obviously, the story, they had to tweak some of the story issues. And I think they've done a great job. Give Rick some backstory, which to me really made you more sympathetic towards Rick, even though he starts out not being, he kind of is like a shyster, kind of a tough guy to deal with at the beginning of the film. But I'm going to get into that before this is over. But I just feel like that everybody can relate to this film. If you're a foreigner, if you're an American, if you're a lover, if you're anybody dealing with strife and hard times and not knowing how to get out of a tough situation. And there's so much stuff, some of the quotes that Rick uses, and I'll get into the quotes a little bit later. He goes, I got it right here. Oh man, I'm sorry about this, Mark.
No worries.
Oh God. Oh man, it's just something of the line of, I help nobody. I stick my neck out for nobody but me. That's how he starts out this film. He's all about himself, and he tells Ugati, played by that
was Peter Lorre.
Peter Lorre, that I stick my neck out for nobody. And then of course Claude Rains comes. He's the prefect, Louis. He's like, no, I stick my neck out. He's like, oh, you're going to help Victor Laszlo and Ingrid Bergman's Ilsa Lund. He's like, no, I stick my neck out for nobody. And he made it clear at the beginning of the film, I stick my neck out for nobody. But like you said, the transformation towards the end of the film, once you start learning about his backstory, where he helped run guns in Ethiopia and he helped do something else, in France. He was a loyalist in Spain and whatnot. So these things help develop the character of Rick. And I think I myself can relate to the Rick character. And that's one of the reasons why I love this film so much, and why it's essential is Humphrey Bogart, at the time, one of the biggest actors in the world, gives probably his best performance of his entire life. One of the greatest acting performances of all time, if you ask me. I mean, his transformation from the beginning of this film to the end of this film is one of the great transformations in any film, and it's one of the great performances in any film. And all the actors give such phenomenal performances. But it's a film for the ages. It's a film for anybody. If you want to study acting, you want to study movies, you should watch Casablanca. This is an absolute, the best example of what movies are meant to be today and back then. Anybody that says that they don't think that Casablanca is something that they should look for in how they want to be a movie maker, a writer, a director, an actor, then they don't understand the business. You know what I mean? It's such a great film for so many different reasons. And it's an obvious choice to be in this book, and for Robert Osborne to have as one of the 52 most essential movies. let's get into some of the little bit scene by scene kind of stuff, Mark. Here, obviously, the beginning of the movie, Peter Lorre, Bugatti, comes in. He says, "Rick, something good happened. You won't believe it. Hey, do you mind taking these letters of transit? There's going to be some questionable people coming after me. You mind taking them?" Of course, Roger Ebert, somebody I admire more than almost anybody. I mean, I have some sports people that I admire, but Roger Ebert I admire almost more than anybody. He calls it a MacGuffin, something that you take from the beginning of the movie that carries you to the end of the movie. And in this case, the MacGuffin is the letters of transit. So talk to me about your thoughts on those early scenes with Peter Lorre and Rick, and then Claude Rains, the prefect, coming in and all that.
Yeah, that's a really cool scene. It has been a little while since I've seen the film, but I do remember that opening scene. I think the one thing that you mentioned earlier was those cast of characters, especially the minor characters. Like the first kind of opening scenes where they're in the bar, Humphrey Bogart's sitting down, and yes, Peter Lorre comes, and yeah, he's trying to convince him to take these letters and stuff like this, which of course he then gets arrested for, I believe, right? So all of that is just establishing the entire film. I mean, you're in this different weird place. There's a ton of people. It's away from the world in most cases, even though it's in the center of the war. It's kind of this little place that they've kind of carved out on their own. And yeah, Peter Lorre, he's not in the film for very long, of course, but his scenes are really incredible. He was such a fantastic actor. He had such a very, very interesting charisma. And he shows that in these sort of opening scenes. And his accent, too, is very, very, very noticeable and very, very infamous. But yeah, it really just establishes Rick as someone who's just trying to, he's at the edge of this war, he's at the edge of the world, he's just trying to run this business. Like, he doesn't want to have anything to do with anybody, really. He's not going to, as you mentioned, he's not going to try to take care of anyone. He's just out for himself. And all of that is established within the first, scene, basically scene or two, particularly in the scene where Peter Lorre comes to ask, Rick for this favor. So he gets arrested soon after, something like that, or shortly after. But you sort of see that. You see what Rick is capable of, just sort of not caring and whatever. And it really does establish who he is at the beginning, and then of course as we talk more, we'll see how that changes. But I think that's also one of my favorite scenes, opening scenes in a film, just because you right away you get the tone of the film. You get that it's going to be something a little bit different. It's a little bit cynical, and yeah, I obviously love it. I also love the way that it's shot. It's so fantastic, and all the different characters, all the different faces of the characters, they're also different, and they're also such different people. So yeah, definitely something that I love.
All right, so then we're going to get into the main part of the story here, where we're introduced to Ilsa, Ingrid Bergman, and Victor Laszlo, Paul Henreid. This becomes a big issue in the film, throughout the film, because then we got the German Major Strasser, played by Veidt. What's his name? I got his name on here. Oh God, Conrad Veidt is his name. Major Strasser. He comes in because he heard that Victor Laszlo is in town, and so we have this whole dynamic where Ilsa doesn't really know who Rick is, because we know that Rick was once known as Richard. So this is a whole dynamic because she's obviously married to Victor Laszlo. He is a German. He's a prisoner. He was in a prisoner of war camp, a concentration camp. He ran a newspaper in Prague, and he was writing all kinds of scandals about the Germans and whatnot. So he became a enemy of state. So let's get into how you think this aspect of this third person, Rick being the third person, with Ingrid Bergman's Ilsa and Victor Laszlo's Paul Henry, played by Paul Henry, who played Victor Laszlo. I can't get the words out.
Well, this is the whole famous line of what he says, of all the gin joints in all the world, she had to run into mine, or something along those lines, right? So she had to walk into mine. So yeah, you sort of see this. It's the establishment of this love triangle, which is going to be persistent throughout the whole film. See his lost love, and as they make it known in the end, they had spent some time together in Paris and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's a really, really amazing kind of thing that they do, where they weave in a very kind of realistic and thoughtful love triangle. It's not really just there, like a lot. It's developed. But I really love this particular setup because, again, it starts literally with him listening to Sam play the famous "As Time Goes By" in this part of the film, and it starts to establish some things as well as within the first scene of what's kind of going to come. So Sam, obviously, we see him; he becomes quite an important character, and then the love and the relationship that he has between Ilsa, the will they, won't they, also then develops later in the film. So it comes with one of the greatest lines ever written and said in film history, and then it sets up this very thoughtful, very well-developed love triangle between Victor and Ilsa and Rick. So it's all just such an amazing setup, basically, in this part of the film.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of the quotes, and I'm going to say, if anybody watching this show, if you go on AFI's 100 movie quotes of all time, there are 6. Casablanca, and the first one in the film is "Play it, Sam, play it as time goes by," and that's when Ilsa comes into Cafe American. Then the next one is in all the gin joints, in all the towns, in all the world, she walks into mine. I mean, just what an amazing, amazing quote amongst all the quotes in movie history. And then the one that Rick says 4 times, he says, "Here's looking at you, kid." I mean, wow. I mean, are you kidding me? "Here's looking at you." He says it 4 times in the film. And then he says this one twice. That's "We'll always have Paris."
Mm-hmm.
He says at the beginning and near the end of the movie. And then the other one is Claude Rains has got a great one. "Round up the usual suspects." That's a great one. Of course, they made an entire movie on that, Usual Suspects, which is a great movie. I found out something about that today. That's interesting. And then, of course, the last one is another great line. "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." I mean, those 6 quotes define this film as one of the greatest films of all time and why it's a must-see movie. Okay, so what I want to get into is I have some other things. He helps the young couple, win at roulette, because he obviously, it's his nightclub and his bar, and he helps them. So he goes from I won't stick my neck up for anybody. I don't stick my neck up. Then he helps the young couple win at roulette. So is this where he starts becoming kind of a sympathetic guy?
I mean, that's what that scene is for. Yeah. You start to see that he has another side to him, that he does care, obviously, but he sort of pushed it down into sort of bitterness and so forth. But also when he's playing the song, when he's asking Sam to play um, as time goes by, obviously that song means something to him, and it means something to Ilsa and how he remembers her. So I actually think you start to see a little bit humanity when he tells him to play the song, because it's more of a memory. It might be bitter, but I think you start to feel some feelings, because he does come off rough in the first, the first part of the film, the early parts of the film, especially with Peter Lorre's character. So yeah, I would say for sure he's now it's like starting. Now a seed has been planted with the writer, who's saying like, okay, this guy is not going to be who you think he is. Here's this little kernel of sympathy, and feeling. He's grizzled, but he's got this softer edge. And certainly that it does help that he goes beyond and then helps this young couple.
All right, so now we start to see him coming around, and we have two major scenes. Obviously, the one scene where both Ilsa and Victor both come to the Cafe American at different times, but one is upstairs in Rick's office, and one's downstairs because he had just got back from the secret loyalist meeting. And finally, Ilsa explains why she did what she did. She was married to Victor the whole time when they were in Paris, that she thought he was dead. It turns out he was not dead. And then that transitions into Rick having the butler take her away and him going down and talking with Victor. Talk about some of that and how powerful those two kind of conjoining scenes are on the overall aspect, which will then get into the ending of the film.
I think in that particular scene, when again he finds out that she's been married, it's kind of interesting because it establishes, I think, that Ilsa's obviously more in love with Rick than her husband, and that's always going to be a conflict. That's just adding fuel to the fire, where they really sort of can't be together. And obviously, she didn't tell him, so there's no chance, but there's still emotion, obviously. So I think that again, that just sort of adds to everything. We get why he's bitter. We kind of get why he's got this longing for this woman, but then we realize, okay, maybe he's not going to actually end up with her. Maybe as he's becoming more sympathetic of a character, maybe he's going to actually do something else. Of course, we don't know that in the middle of the film, let's say, but it's all just this almost perfect establishment, or I would say perfect establishment of these great writing, which is fantastic in this film. And yeah, definitely all these little things are sort of leading towards this end, which is also one of the most satisfying ends in film history. So yeah.
Yeah, obviously, Laszlo's in the Rick's Cafe American downstairs. The soldiers barge in. Louis barges in, and they're like, "Okay, you're going to be arrested," because they set it up that way to where he will try to get the letters of transit from Rick, but then Rick turns it around on him and says, "No, we're getting out of here. Call the airport. We're going." And he makes Ilsa believe that he's going with her. And of course, we know exactly what happens. It turns out that once they convince Louis to take him to the airport, and Louis kind of makes a phone call, which has to get Major Strasser to the airport so we can have the conclusion. So that he kind of makes that fake phone call, and when he makes the fake phone call, we're going to get that drama towards the end of the film. And so we have these two characters that are meant to be together, but of course, love doesn't always work that way. And sometimes, even though these two characters are meant to be together, they can't have one another. In a lot of ways, kind of like my film behind me in La La Land. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to La La Land, or La La Land is very similar to Casablanca. So then we get the ending. We have them trying to stop the plane. He has to shoot Strasser. He pulls out the gun. They pull out the gun. He shoots first, and Strasser's gone. I mean, did you think that this is going to end up working in their favor the way? Is it just it would have to have a happy ending?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say, and definitely toward the end of the last act, you were kind of on the edge of your seat, and so obviously you don't really think. I mean, I remember the first time watching it in film school, and the ending is so famous that most people know the ending of Casablanca. We know what happens to Ilsa. We also know what happens to Rick. So even though I knew that, yeah, there's definitely that tension, and I think that's again part of it. Why I almost categorize it more of a thriller than, or at least a chase movie or something, rather than a romantic movie. Even though that's a huge part of it, I understand, but it's that aspect, I would say, from the last quarter, excuse me, of the film. And yeah, there's definitely parts of it where, even though you know what the ending is, they still throw in these things where you're kind of second guessing yourself, and you're wondering, will the plan go? Like, what will happen? And then once Strasser comes to the airport, I think that's a really cool scene, because it's almost like telling the audience, like, this is not going to be easy for the characters. There's going to be some more conflict before we actually have a conclusion. And it's all sort of perfectly timed as well in the film, and perfectly paced.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a film start out and end so perfectly. And it's just like everything was like a piece of the puzzle, and all these pieces just fell into place within the film and made just the greatest puzzle. And obviously it's a movie, it's not a puzzle, but it's just so many wonderful, just little things that just make this movie so great. And we've got into it over and over. Mark and I have. The acting, the story, the directing, the cinematography, the quotes, the love story, just the whole, everything about Casablanca is just such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful film. I just want to say thank you, Mark. Where can you be found?
Yeah, thanks so much. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Mark Tordai, MarkTordai. And actually, my best friend and I we're going to be putting out a YouTube channel called Acceleration Productions, where we're going to have a film and TV review site, a review area, excuse me, as well as some other things that I think are going to be really fun. So if you want any of the links in the next few days, they're going to be on my Twitter. So please follow me on Twitter, and then that way you'll be able to see my video reviews with my friend, which I'm very excited about. So again, also thank you, Dan.
No problem at all. I'll be following you, Mark. I really look forward to that. You can find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, or sometimes it gives you your name and then your handle. So you can also find me at From the Fourth Row. And this is the first episode of 52 of these, folks. So I hope you enjoyed the first one, and we're gonna keep cranking these out for you. Good night.